welcome back. You've just tuned into Women's AM. This morning I am joined by sisters Nazia, Sister Shahina and our special guest sister Afshan. Welcome back, sisters. MashaAllah, Sister Afshan, we've got you on the show with 30 years experience in as a counsellor and a marriage mediator, MashaAllah. What else do you do outside of this counselling position?
Okay, MashaAllah, just recently had a book published called Secrets of a Successful Marriage.
MashaAllah. And
I do cover this topic in there. We'll be talking about in the book. So yeah, that's what I've just done recently.
MashaAllah. So you talk about in-laws and other aspects of marriage within your book?
Yes. It's quite full of very practical advice.
What made you decide to write a book on this topic?
My 30 years of experience.
Have you found that a lot of the things that people come to you about were sort of the same recurring?
Yes, it's a recurring theme, and the reasons of people having marriage problems, it becomes like a similar pattern, you see. So that's why I've covered in the book all the subjects I've seen over the years have caused, and obviously giving the way out and how to deal with those things.
It's definitely a good thing to have, because I think we don't find enough material that kind of describes, you know, sort of certain marriage problems and what you can do to tackle those problems. So alhamdulillah, it's a good thing to definitely have out there as advice, inshallah. Well, going on to our topic now, mashallah, which is how to deal with the in-laws. Marriage is one of the most overwhelming times in a woman's life, especially when she is faced with the all too familiar challenges of settling in with the in-laws. Unfortunately, due to cultural and some Islamic practices, many suffer heartbreaking situations leading to failed marriages. Today is the first of our new marriage series, where we are accompanied by Sister Afshan Khan from Sukoon Healing, who's been counselling and mediating between couples and families for over 30 years. To start the series, Sister Afshan will begin with giving advice to the husband's family. Remember, this is a live discussion, so if any of you viewers would like to have an input in the discussion or would like to put a question to the panel, please do call the number on your screen now or tweet us at Islam Channel #WAM15. So, Sister Afshan, what are some of the challenges that women face with their in-laws, and where do these problems stem from?
Okay, obviously the main problem not problem, but it's a change of lifestyle from being single to now married. That is already an overwhelming change. And then sometimes if you're required to move in with your in-laws, then you're making new relationships with them. So it's all new, and it's a time of adjustment. So sometimes, alhamdulillah, this is a good thing to make new relationships, but what happens when cultural elements come in, then that can cause a very negative effect on the family and also on the new daughter-in-law.
SubhanAllah, because it's a difficult time, because as well as having to get to know your spouse, you're having to get to know the in-laws, and you have to kind of find your way in how the dynamics works. I mean, Sister Shahina, I mean, we've seen a lot of people, you probably had a lot of sisters come to you as well for advice on this topic. What have you found were the problems and where they came from?
I mean, unfortunately, there aren't that many sisters who don't actually have these kind of problems, who haven't faced these challenges, even in today's generation, even in today's society. Thing is, there's endless lists of what people go through. Every reality is different, but some of the common problems are, as Sister mentioned, the cultural expectation. And like, for example, within the Asian culture, and this I've also heard from within Arab culture and other Somali culture, so it's not just exclusive to Asian culture. It's the expectations from the in-laws that once you get married, it's not just the husband that you have married, you've sort of married the entire family. And not even having that time where you actually get to know your husband, that you go straight in and you're building relationships with all these other strangers as well. Like I said, everyone's reality is different. Some people, alhamdulillah, do have good experiences, but most of the time, it's not even an issue that someone's in-laws are bad. It can be nice people, but because it's a situation where I think some of the culture from back home, back in our countries, where the reality and the housing situation is different, have been brought over here, where we know what the housing situation is like here. We know how many bathrooms, how many toilets, how many bedrooms there are. There's not much privacy, and that is a serious issue. So not enough space, not enough privacy, and as Numan Ali Khan talked about in his video once, that it ends up that the new daughter-in-law who comes into the house, or wife who comes into the house, that her home becomes just her bedroom. which isn't healthy. And then the other most common issue is that the expectation from the in-laws that you cook and clean for everybody in the house. I think that is something that affects people a lot, especially when it's demanded and enforced, which is contrary to Islam, which we will go into.
It's a shame, because you would think that, subhanAllah, with a daughter-in-law coming into the family home, that the family would be very, very accommodating, and a lot of the times that's not the case. I mean, Sister Afshan, what are some of the things that you've come with in terms of like daughter-in-laws coming to you and kind of stating their grievances with their in-laws? What are some of the sisters said to you about what the issues may be?
Well, there's many issues. I mean, the main issue is like Sister Shania is saying, is that you're expected to lose your identity. So you're coming from a family, obviously you're educated, you have some opinions, and everything's going to be the way that we want it. So the relationship becomes more about control. Instead of welcoming the daughter-in-law, it's like, well, you've come now, and it's the way that we would like things. So, they will control things on how she looks, what she eats, even her weight. And slowly, obviously, this erodes a person's self-confidence.
SubhanAllah. Even how much she can go and see her family, how much she can go out, who she seeks permission from, all of that is taken from our hands.
SubhanAllah, you find a lot of things that are being dictated to the daughter-in-law that necessarily have nothing to do with the in-laws at all. But it's a shame that you see that these practices happening. And what the funny thing is that when you look at sort of not just within the Muslim community, but even within the wider community, and you look at movies, for example, you often see, the mother and daughter-in-law relationship depicted as a really, really difficult one. You've got films where you have, mother and daughter-in-law actually going at each other, and imagining one harming the other. That's how frustrating. Exactly. You get to that point where you're so frustrated. I mean, Nazia, why do we find, that it's so difficult between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law?
It's the age-old question, isn't it? Part of the problem is exactly that. I think many instances, people go in there with a lot of preconceived notions. Yes. They take a lot of baggage with them, if I'm honest. Yeah. And it's not just with the mother-in-law, also the daughter-in-law. You have a situation where the mother-in-law, she spent all her life, she was once a daughter-in-law. And you would think she would be the one person in the world who would understand where you as a daughter-in-law coming into, she's witnessed the fact that you've left your home, everyone that you were familiar to you, you've come into a household of complete strangers. So you would have that empathy and that understanding. But it's really sad, because sometimes you do hear the stories, well, instead of being empathetic about the whole situation, you sort of turn around and say, well, I had to deal with it. Yeah. So deal with it yourself. So you deal with it yourself. What's the problem? And so begins the vicious cycle. This awful cycle where instead of actually turning around and saying, because in some cases people do understand, they do know what the rights of the daughter-in-law are. But instead of standing up and saying that, what happened to me wasn't right, and I'm not going to do that to my daughter-in-law, but instead the cycle continues. And similarly with the daughter-in-law, if she was growing up as a daughter, witnessing a volatile relationship between her mother and her in-law, then the same thing applies there. That she comes with this baggage of thinking, well, now is this going to happen to me? But if we were to come into the relationship without all that baggage, with the understanding that, no one has the right to oppress another individual, no one should make assumptions or have suspicions. And in fact, I wanted to read this hadith because, although this hadith is specific to relationships in general, but as I was reading it, read it from the eyes of a relationship between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. It says, and it's taken from Sahih Muslim, avoid suspicion, for suspicion is the gravest lie in talk, and do not be inquisitive about one another, do not spy on one another, and do not feel envy with one another, and nurse no malice, and nurse no aversion and hostility against one another, and be fellow brothers and servants of Allah. And it's so incredible because, I was reading this research on marriage where a Terry Apter report was actually saying that 2/3 of women felt that their mother-in-laws were jealous of the relationship that they had. And then if you asked the mother-in-laws, 2/3 of them felt that they felt excluded by their daughter-in-laws. There's so much suspicion. There's so much of kind of this whole thing of, is she going to take my son away? Therefore, this whole thing comes... Ownership. It becomes a control issue. So rather than two people coming together and actually saying what marriage should be about, which is it's a family coming together, merging together. It should be a harmonious process, but instead, it could actually become an awful process by which once that respect, especially with it's such a fragile relationship, once that respect is lost at the beginning, it's very difficult to fix it.
It's a really difficult situation, I suppose, especially when you live with your in-laws. It's very different when you don't live with your in-laws, because you're able to have, you know, certain boundaries set. And when you live together in one whole household, we all know that even living with our own families that we were born with and grew up with, it's very difficult getting along with everyone. So you shouldn't have the expectation that you're all going to get along incredibly well with your in-laws, although you shouldn't have the expectation that you're not going to either. But do you find, Sister Afshan, from your conversations with sisters that have come to you with this matter in terms of their relationship with the mother-in-law, have you found that sometimes this sense of control and ownership that some mothers have towards their sons is the driving factor for some of the things that mother-in-laws would put their daughters-in-law through?
Most times it is that, and what they feel is that now they've actually lost a role, because they've looked after their son all their life, and now somebody's come into the equation, and now they feel insecure that now what's going to happen is, and I think what the main point is that the husband, the son, should be aware of the sensitive time for both his wife and his mother. And like sometimes I give advice to the brothers when they come for couple counselling, it's best is to make sure this particular time when you are married is just still spend some time with your mum. Buy her flowers, make her feel that she's still so important in your life. And I tell you, if you did that, you would a lot of the problems would go away. But just going back to the cultural issue, you mentioned about Islam. Now, if we looked at the Islamic perspectives on things, then I don't think there'd be that much of an issue. But when it comes to cultural issues, it just makes things very, very messy.
It's unfortunate sometimes. What sort of cultural practices have you seen that have kind of added to that tension between, in that relationship?
I mean, the main thing I see is when somebody comes into a family and it's like, well, there's no flexibility. So you have to do things, because if you think about it, your mother-in-law's been doing things for 30, 40 years, yeah. So obviously she's just very good at it. And if you can't match the way that she does things, then, you're just probably just lazy, or you just can't do it. And there's a lot of stress that's put around the housework and responsibilities, and most of it is sometimes just oppression and abuse.
It can be, unnecessary criticisms, even sometimes just, even snide remarks, or just an attitude towards a person, like if they were to do something for you and you just, you show that you're not very pleased with the way that they've done it, so you
it's criticism, it's just the way that you act. I mean, I've heard shouting, I've heard abuse, I've heard swearing. And how is that going to make the other person feel? If it's like your daughter-in-law, how is it going to make her feel? But it's my right. I have the right to do this. I'm sure there are many families out there, mashallah, who, alhamdulillah, are good in-laws and good daughter-in-laws, but I'm just talking about my experiences. This is what I see.
Well, that's the thing.
It's happening now as well.
I think that's the thing. We don't want to come across disparaging mother-in-laws and all-in-laws like that.
I'm a mother-in-law myself, so...
That's not the case. I think what is an issue that is very common and is a problem that a lot of people are facing. So it is, I think, there has to be a lot of clarity within our community, and we are a Muslim community, and we do have a reference point, and that is Islam. And I think it's been way past time that we needed to get clarity on what the Islamic viewpoint is, and I think that is what needs to be done.
Definitely. I was just to share this morning. This in the last few months, it's been 99% I've been dealing with marital discord. It's around in-laws.
I think, subhanAllah, we forget some of the etiquettes in Islam, that is to respect one another, to make excuses for one another, to be understanding to one another, and we forget those things when it comes to in-laws, whether they be our, parent in-laws, or whether it's the, the in-laws, the daughter-in-law and son-in-law. And it's unfortunate that it's something that somehow, we have to regain that sort of etiquette in Islam. But inshallah, we will be coming back to the discussion. Remember, it's a live show, so please do call in with any questions or comments. But stay tuned for the rest of this discussion. And before we go, here's a reminder of this week's competition. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Women's AM, where we continue our discussion on the in-laws. Remember, this is a part of the first series in a marriage series. So today we are discussing the in-laws, but inshallah we'll be discussing more aspects of marriage. And if you want to join in on the discussion, please do call in to the number on your screens, or you can tweet us at Islam Channel, #WAM15. We've got Sister Tabassum on the line. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Tabassum. What is your comment or question?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I just felt that the discussion seemed a bit one-sided in relation to the treatment of daughter-in-laws not being treated well. My experience has not been this, and I think I speak for many families up and down the country. When my sister-in-law came from abroad, there was tremendous affection for her before she came. She's been treated exceedingly well. She's been helped to realize dreams she never had, educated to a professional level. In fact, her husband put his career on hold so that she could progress and better herself and fulfill dreams that, in fact, the husband had for her. So I think that, it's not all negative. There are many women who are daughter-in-laws, very, very happy and treated very well, living in loving homes. In fact, as a result of all of this, sometimes the treatment, the problem then appears to be coming from the daughter-in-laws towards the family. So, I just thought I'd redress the balance a bit.
Jazakallah khair for that, Sister Tabassum. I mean, she's absolutely right in what she said, that sometimes the issues do stem from the daughter-in-laws because she comes in, with these ideas and her defences are up. But just to make it clearer, this is the first part in a marriage series. Today we are discussing the in-laws, and inshallah we'll be discussing other parts of the dynamics of marriage. But Sister Tabassum, if you want to address a bit of parts of what the sister has said.
Well, I think what we're trying to do here is, from the experience I've had and the things that I have seen over my years of counselling, it's really important to bring them up, much as I'm sure we've said that there are other families there who are very welcoming, very good, but we can't deny this. There's a lot of cultural issues going on which are affecting, and I see women nearly every day of my life where their mental health is affected, their confidence is affected, where there's a lot of oppression going on, and we know this is not allowed in Islam, so we have to raise these issues. So I think it's more about
acknowledging what it is,
what's going on in the community, because if you work in the community, you have a sense of direction, you know what's happening. And I suppose with my work, it's really at the ground root level that like if I talk about teenagers, parenting, I know exactly what's happening because people are coming and telling me and sharing. So this is the reason why I presume we're doing the show.
SubhanAllah, sister, you did touch upon a few impact that this sort of relationship would have on a daughter-in-law. You said that she would, face a lot of some mental health issues and other issues. Can you tell us about sort of the stuff that you found in your experiences, the impact that it's had on the daughter-in-law?
Okay, so many times obviously it affects their emotional well-being, it affects their mental health, it affects the marriage because it's a continuous cycle of confusion within the marriage, because they're not allowed to have any stability within the marriage because there's always some kind of problems going on. I suppose sometimes the husbands feel they don't know how to deal with the mother and how to deal with the wife, and they sometimes might want to just think, I can't deal with anything, so I'll leave it. But mental health is a big, big thing that I see. A lot of sisters suffer from depression, anxiety, panic attacks, extreme nervous breakdown. So this is the reason we have to address this, because once that happens, then obviously if you have children, then it affects the children, it affects the children's, it affects the household, it affects society.
SubhanAllah, because you don't tend to think beyond, that sort of individual aspect of how it affects the daughter-in-law, whatever it is that's going on in the household. But, inshallah, if there were to be children, SubhanAllah, the children are going to see their mother being treated in a certain way, and that tends to sort of perpetuate that this is a norm, this is how families behave to one another, and it's okay to do that because this is how our family behave, SubhanAllah, which is a shame. I mean, Sister Nazia, what else have you seen from, being out there in the community and talking with sisters? What impact have you seen that this has on them?
It's interesting because I've got a couple of friends who are GPs, and they often say that it's a common scenario for them to see housewives, particularly suffering from depression, and often the case is one of the factors is the in-laws and the kind of the stress of the dynamics of the sort of extended family and the pressures and the expectations that they have. Sometimes there are expectations they can't even fix. I mean, the example that you gave about the image, the way that they're supposed to look, even sometimes when things are not done the way that they may want it done. There's so many host of things. In fact, the same report that I was citing, Terry Apter report, it said after speaking to 163 people, it was discovered that 60% of women felt friction with their mother-in-laws, and it caused long-term stress. So it points out that there are issues there. And if you look at the issues, at best of times, being a wife and a mother, it's a hard job. It's a tough job. You know, when you think of all the things that can possibly happen when you are pregnant, the illness that sometimes women suffer during pregnancies, within that situation they still have to deal with the extended family, the fact that afterwards when she gives birth she may be suffering from postnatal depression, and then on top of it if you have very difficult family dynamics, the whole point is to raise awareness that there is that reality that exists. Obviously, that's something, you know, we're not saying is one-ended. We're not saying that the problems, there are very supportive families as well, where you have scenarios where the in-laws will come together and the whole family support. But often we're raising the awareness of cases where that doesn't happen. And when that doesn't happen, this is a serious issue because, as you said, the consequences is that it affects the next generation. Yes. And we are seeing this vicious cycle where instead of the oppressed sort of learning from that situation, they then later become oppressors themselves. And this is a sad situation because often culture is such a huge thing. It's amazing how you can have sometimes even a religious family, but in the situation of marriage and relationships, they will apply culture as the driving force. So another example that you gave, the issue, actually, she mentioned the fact about the one room that is now her complete
it's her domain.
Her domain. Mm-hmm. But sometimes there are instances where that domain is violated, where they might even say, well, this is our house. But then you forget the Islamic injunction, well, but you still need to seek permission to go into their rooms. So if you look at the dynamic, what does that do to the individual? Well, if you feel violated in that way, that you don't even have that respect with someone who will respect your privacy, give you that time and space, what does that do to you? It takes your dignity away from you, isn't it? It really, when you look at the examples of these women, they suffer from very low self-esteem, and this is something that, as a community, you know, they're the ones who are going to deal with the next generation, so we have to deal with that.
You know what, one of the issue here is, while, like we said, we recognise there are in-laws who don't have these issues and they're very affectionate and accommodating, but it is such a huge issue in this community, and I have seen sisters who are, you know, educated, headstrong women, and to be broken down to a point where they have no identity left, no self-esteem left, that every day, like, there are days when they don't want to wake up.
They don't resemble at all the person that they once were, which is a shame.
Absolutely, and there are days...
Exactly.
Yeah, there are days where they don't want to wake up because, look, home is a situation that is supposed to be your place, your space, where you relax, where you go to away from the world. But if that home isn't your home and is a place of conflict, what does that do to you psychologically? If your bedroom becomes your home, those four walls, what does that do to you psychologically? I think it's really important that we as a community acknowledge that this is a huge problem, and the problem within the community is that it's not talked about. Yes. It has to be talked about because it's affecting people to a point that it's not just the individual and it's not the mother. The impact that it has on the children, in her raising the children, there are instances where, you know, they end up, the mother takes it out on the children because there's no one else to take it out on. Because the understanding is that your in-laws can say whatever they want to you, and you should, as a good girl, would just listen and take it, one who has been raised well and not speak back. Can you imagine what that does to a person, to boil up inside, to affect every aspect of her being, her character, her relationship with her husband, not have a say in her life? That kind of drastic change, and there are sisters out there in that situation, and it is something that impacts your whole life, that it stays with you forever.
I think that's one of the issues is that, you know, you become so dehumanized in that situation, and I think that sometimes the in-laws don't even realize how dehumanizing it is because they don't even view her as a person, which is, I think, one of the things that if there is no notion of this person is an individual, this person is a human being outside of this relationship that they now have with our family, they were a whole person before they came here. So obviously they would have had views, they would have had opinions, they would have had, you know, all the sorts of things that make them who they are, and then to totally disregard that when they come into your home, it's really, really devastating.
And to not have the support of the husband in some instances, what that does to a person. You really got to ask those questions, and we really have to talk about it because it's a completely, I don't know if you find this in your experience, that it's something that a daughter-in-law can't raise, her parents can't often raise because they'll be seen as, oh, you're someone who doesn't, oh, no, you're someone who's not family orientated, you would raise your daughter badly. Do you find that?
I think the main thing is sometimes, just going back to your point about practicing, sometimes we really have to work on that word, what is it, practicing? Because, you know, when sisters say to me, you know what, I'm married to this family because they were practicing. Yeah. But as soon as I walked in, the practicing word come completely out. So outwardly, everybody's praying to everything, but it comes to my right. And Allah talks about the rights of a human being, and it just is disregarded, for example, in the way that everything that I do is wrong, I'm criticised. So it's very important that sometimes we have to look, what does practicing mean? It means actually the heart. Yeah, having fear of that heart in any relationship that you have in life. Not just the fact that she's a daughter-in-law, but she's somebody else's daughter you brought in, and you want her to be treated in a certain way. So sometimes this is very devastating for sisters to think, well, Islam says this, and then always speak to husbands.
Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't connect. That knowledge doesn't actually connect with the nafs, and that's why you don't see these things translating, unfortunately. But we will come back, inshallah, as we're going to a break very soon. Inshallah, if you have been affected by anything that's going on in the topic, please do call in to put any questions or comments to the panel, and we will see you shortly after the break to continue the discussion. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Women's AM, where we continue our discussion on dealing with the in-laws. Remember, this is a first in the marriage series, so this is just one aspect. But if you feel that you need to, if you feel like you've been affected, inshallah, we hope that you benefit from this topic. Inshallah, we're going to come back. We started to discuss on, you know, Islam, the Islamic perspective on the relationship between in-laws, so mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, just generally, how should we view this relationship? Because sometimes we feel like there isn't enough information in how we should be dealing with one another. Shahina.
What I do want to say is one of the relationship that it's not is that it's not master and slave relationship, which is currently is the case culturally. From the Islamic perspective, look, the way that we define our relationship from Islam, we as Muslims refer to Islam for what our rights and responsibility are, isn't it? So that the way that we define our relationship from Islam in terms of our relationship with our parents, our own siblings, our husband, our friends, our neighbors, our responsibility as a ummah, as a community, we also need to go to Islam to define our relationship between our in-laws, whether it be mother-in-law, father-in-law, brother-in-laws, sister-in-laws. So point is, go to Islam, the Islamic reference point. Now, here's what my issue is. From my experience and what I have witnessed is often you watch even like Islamic Q&As in certain channels where the Bengali, so I've seen Bengali community, the Asian community, other communities call up and ask questions about this issue. And this is something that comes up a lot. Oh, Imam, what is the standpoint on my relationship with my mother-in-law or her rights over me? And I'm telling you, sis, the answers have never been sufficient. Never a sufficient answer is given from an Islamic point of view. We need to know what the bottom line is. What is the hukum shara? What is the Islamic ruling? What right does my mother-in-law have over me? My father-in-law have over me? My brother-in-laws have over me? What my husband has over me? You as an imam, as a person of knowledge, to whom someone has come to with the issue, you need to give an honest answer. And our community leaders aren't doing that. I know why. Because this is such a norm culturally. It's such a sensitive issue. And sometimes they feel hesitant to give the honest answer. There's one particular imam who gave an answer. He said, look, we should have that relationship where you treat your mother-in-law like your own mother, that the mother-in-law treats your daughter like your own daughter. We have that, but at the same time, you got to remember, you can't go off to your bedroom with your chicken and chips and forget about your in-laws. That is not a sufficient answer. Some people might go off upstairs with chicken chips. Does that make them a bad person now? No, you have to give a realistic answer as to what does Islam say. And then after that, you know what? Islam encourages charity, compassion, kindness. I'm not saying that we don't do that. We do that. We're a family unit. You want to create an environment that is loving for your children to raise.
But I think it's establishing those boundaries because people don't actually know what those boundaries are when it comes to the in-laws. I think once you know what those boundaries are, what the actual rights and responsibilities are to one another, then you know where to to make your stand on certain issues.
Absolutely.
But Sister Afshan, what sort of tips can you give to anyone that's watching today who may be going through a similar situation where they're finding it difficult in having a good relationship with their in-laws? What would you say to them?
The best advice is to actually to speak to somebody. What happens with a lot of sisters is they're going through something and they go through depression and they don't know who to speak to. So they speak to somebody who's impartial, somebody who will give you choose a wise sister. Yeah, sometimes sisters talk to everybody, but choose somebody who will give you good advice, somebody who fears Allah. So they'll give you advice based on what's good for you, not just for your here, but for your hereafter.
Jazakallah khair for that, Jazakallah, Sister Afsha. It has been a really, really good discussion. Dealing with the in-laws, it is a challenge, but that should not stop us from mutually fulfilling our rights and responsibilities to one another. There is much joy and reward to be gained with the joining of two families, especially with our children. While it's a test, we must exercise patience in our course of dealings with our in-laws, because after all, they are the parents of the one we are married to, and inshallah will be a long life relationship that needs to be supported by all involved. So Jazakallah khair to all the sisters and for everyone watching, and we'll see you tomorrow inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.